Hey guys, so welcome to part 3 of my 4-part April, May, June, and July wrap-up. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2 yet, please do so by clicking the links in the description below, and there will also be links to each of them at the end of the video. I guess you can totally watch them in any order you so choose, as long as you watch them, because there's quite a lot that I've missed telling you about the last few months. Basically, in case you're new to this wrap-up, or if you need a refresher, I haven't done a wrap-up since March, and over the course of 4 months, from where that wrap-up left off, the end of July, I've read 48 books. I started, and in some cases finished, several series, and I'm talking about those series, the whole series, instead of individually throughout this wrap-up. So these aren't necessarily in chronological order, just whatever's making sense and organizing them over 4 videos. So without further ado, this is part 3. Let's get started. I read, for the first time, the entire Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis. I had read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in middle school, but yeah, that was a long time ago, and I didn't read any of the others. Of course, I knew a bit about the series, at least a little, because of the movies. I've seen all 3 of the most recent adaptations, Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but I gotta be honest, I don't really like those movies that much. The first one is okay, but overall they just never really captured me, and I hadn't yet felt compelled to read the books because I wasn't sure how close the movie adaptations are. Turns out the first one is fairly close, while the others are pretty freaking different. But that's okay. I decided to finally give reading this series a shot, and for the most part, I really enjoyed it. I read it in chronological order, not publication order, so I started with The Magician's Nephew, and I have to say that that is definitely my favorite in the series. It's the only one that I gave 5 stars to, and I just really enjoyed it a lot. I'm sure a lot of people have read the series already, so I won't talk about each one too much. Plus, I went in only vaguely knowing what the whole thing is about, and really enjoyed it a lot reading like that, so maybe you will too. Basically though, this first one is set before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and gives us this really great origin story for Narnia, Aslan, the White Witch, and other things introduced and put into the rest of the series. Reading this was really my first introduction to C.S. Lewis's writing. I don't think I really noticed how The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was written when I was in middle school, and I just have to say that I love the way C.S. Lewis writes. His writing style just feels very natural, a bit conversational, not too simple, but easy to take in and to follow at all times. His humor is really fantastic. I didn't expect to laugh so much while I was reading this book. It was great to start with this one too, because it references so many upcoming events in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, lots of laying the groundwork for that next book, and since I've already read that and seen the movie plenty of times, it was cool to get that connection. I'm really glad that I read these in chronological order, because I think if I had started with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I wouldn't really have enjoyed diving into this series quite as much, because I would have felt that I already knew the story, and maybe gone in like, oh, I already know the story, it's just going to be a kind of boring to read this. Whereas starting with The Magician's Nephew, I got something new and really good, and really, I guess, compelled me to want to keep going with the series and pay attention to the writing and keep in mind how all of this started and came to be in The Magician's Nephew. So I gave Magician's Nephew 5, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe 4. It was good and I liked the story. I've always liked the story, but it wasn't as great for me as The Magician's Nephew. And then The Horse and His Boy, which is the 3rd chronologically, a 3. I feel like this book just comes out of nowhere. To me, it doesn't really fit all that well into the series. I mean, it sort of does, but I just didn't enjoy it as much. The story is kind of boring to me, though the characters were interesting. The 2 main characters and their talking horses, I actually kind of like how this one is a little bit different and focuses on characters that actually already live in Narnia, but I don't know, I would have preferred to see more appearances. I mean, this takes place during the reign as kings and queens, but we barely get anything about them. I think a book maybe focusing more on that side of the story would fit better. I did think the characters in this one were well written. I just wish the story had been a little bit more interesting. It could have been better, but certainly things felt like they were just glazed over, and the ending was more underwhelming than I think it's supposed to be. Anyway, I gave the last 4 books all 4 stars, Voyage of the Dawn Treader and Silver Chair being my favorites. I think Prince Caspian is really well written, but Voyage of the Dawn Treader really brings it up a notch for me. I love stories that take place on ships, and this story is just so much fun. The main character, Eustace, is absolutely the most obnoxious character ever, but I actually really love the way his obnoxiousness is written, and I love the journey he goes through as a character. I just think this book specifically is one of the most imaginative in the series, and I had the most fun listening to it. Then the Silver Chair brings Eustace back with another character named Jill as they go on a quest, and I really like that about this book. It's definitely a questing story as these two go off in search of a prince, and it introduces an amazing character, Puddleglum, whose upbeat negativity just never gets old. I really like those two books, Voyage of the Dawn Treader and Silver Chair, a lot. And then The Last Battle, book 7, was also really good in my opinion. Not great, but a good ending to the series. I won't talk too much about it because it's the last book in a series, but there are certain things that I really liked and enjoyed, certain things I really didn't like and kind of hated. I don't think I'll ever get over what C.S. Lewis decided to do with Susan, and the tone of this book just feels really off compared to the other books, but it's good, it's engaging, and it's very emotional. Despite the shift in tone, or maybe because of it, it definitely felt like the end. Overall, I'm really glad to have finally read the series. I liked it, and I'm happy to finally know what it's all about. One thing I'm a bit mixed on is that the series as a whole doesn't feel all that cohesive. At times they seem a bit disconnected from one another, and I'm not sure if I like that. Though I do kind of like how each of them technically could be read on its own and stand alone without the others, but I don't know how good they'd be on their own. Horse and His Boy, for example, but they technically could be, I guess. Also, I know this is sort of backwards, but this series, especially Magician's Nephew and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, gave me these really great nostalgic feelings for the Magician's trilogy by Lev Grossman. I know that's technically supposed to be the other way around, but I got some references in the Magician's trilogy books from reading this that I hadn't necessarily gotten before. Good stuff. Next is a slew of Stephen King books that I've read over the last few months. One of them is The Running Man, written under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. It's a gruesome, pretty freaking dark outlook on the future, the far distant future of 2025. That one, as it was written in the 70s. A totalitarian dystopian future where a government-operated TV station, the Games Network, runs these really violent game shows that the society just eats up like candy. And the main character, Ben Richards, is put into a contest called The Running Man. He is marked as a fugitive and must elude these station-hired hunters who are out to find and kill him, and he is given $100 for every hour he survives, $100 for every police officer or hunter he kills, and $1 billion if he lasts for 30 days, and the record is just over 8 days. He's given some money right off to survive with and a video camera, and he must record himself and send them video messages twice a day, and the Games Network can then broadcast those as part of the show, and he must do this without giving himself away. This is a seriously brutal story. The really shocking and crazy ending is just really, really bleak and depressing all throughout, really. It was enjoyable though, and compelling. Definitely a sort of parent to the Hunger Games, I'd say. Just way crazier and darker. Stephen King actually wrote this book within a week, when it usually takes him about 4 months to write something. And then the next one is sort of in the same vein, The Long Walk, also written under his pseudonym Richard Bachman, and is based on another sort of contest that people are forced into doing for money. You can easily imagine this taking place in the same world as The Running Man. This one is a lot better though. I enjoyed it a lot more. I gave The Running Man 4 stars and The Long Walk 5 stars. It's just so well written, and the characters are really, really great, and it's impossible to stop reading once you started. 100 boys enter into The Long Walk. Only one can win, and they must walk at all times, day and night. Must always stay above 4 miles an hour. If they drop below that, they're given a warning. After an hour of maintaining minimum speed again, your warning gets lifted, but if you're under minimum speed for 30 seconds, you get another warning. And if you get 3 warnings, you're ticketed. We follow this seriously great cast of characters as they interact with one another, while at the same time trying to beat one another. It's extremely gripping, has fantastic character development, and just overall is crazy good. It's a really quick read and a short read too, so I absolutely advise you to pick it up and try it. This next book is Stephen King's newest book, and it's actually the only physical book in this entire wrap-up that I read. Crazy, right? I'm hoping you'll see that get better from now on in the future wrap-ups. Anyway, this is the sequel to Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers. It follows a completely different kind of story, but has a few of the same characters, specifically Bill Hodges, a retired cop that's basically a private detective now, and other characters that help him. The first book was about this seriously twisted guy who drives a Mercedes into a crowd of people, and this one is about a guy who is so obsessed with one particular author, and specifically the author's most famous series and character, and just would do anything to get his hands on more books following that character. This story starts out promising, but honestly it just kind of fell flat for me. I liked it, it was okay, but in the end it just wasn't nearly up to par with his other work. The premise was definitely interesting at first, and it started out really strong. It was really good at first, but as a whole it's not very well written. The pacing is weird, the characters are flat, the plot isn't actually all that compelling. It just really lacks what I love so much about Stephen King's other books. Great, rounded, fully fleshed out characters specifically. And this book had its characters talking and doing things, but none of it really seem to give a good sense of them. And Bill Hodges, who's supposedly supposed to be the main character of the series, is just really bland and uninteresting in this. He doesn't do anything interesting, he doesn't say anything interesting, it's all just rather bland and run-of-the-mill, which kind of pains me to say. You guys know how much I love Stephen King. This one just really didn't do it for me though, and it took me forever to read. I just kept losing interest in it. The last Stephen King book that I read, and the second to last I'll be talking about in this wrap-up, is called Firestarter. After Finders Keepers, I really had the urge to go back to Stephen King's older work to kind of put everything into perspective again, that I love Stephen King's writing. And this book surrounds a man named Andy and his daughter Charlie as they flee from a government organization out to get them. More specifically, out to get Charlie. See, when Andy and Charlie's mom, Victoria, were in college, they participated in a drug testing program for a drug called Lot 6. This testing enabled them to develop various hypnotic telekinetic powers, and their daughter Charlie ended up being born as a pyrokinetic, allowing her to create, manipulate, and control fire. And she is just immensely powerful. When the book begins, we are dropped like right into the middle of the conflict. Andy and Charlie are already on the run without explanations as to why they are, where Andy's wife is, who's after them, and what for. And this is just so awesome. It's non-stop plot development as we follow these two attempting to evade capture. We get a mix of flashbacks and viewpoints from other characters, which all accumulates to this really engaging story about a father and daughter, their connection, their history, how they've come to live this way, and how they've developed in dealing with Charlie's abilities. These characters are all just so well written, both Andy and Charlie, and many of the supporting characters as well. There's a character in this called John Rainbird, whose presence just commands your attention in every scene that he's in. He really sees through to the core of each and every character and of himself, which leads to some pretty chilling moments involving him. It's just such a well-written book, and I gave it 5 stars. I think this is one of his more underrated and less talked about books, and I think a lot of different people would like it a lot. The very last book of part 3 is a book I've just been hearing people talking about a whole lot lately, and that is You by Carolyn Kepnes. I listened to the audiobook of this and just, wow, you should really consider doing the same. It adds a whole new level to the story to hear these things actually said out loud. Basically, it's about a guy named Joe who's essentially stalking a girl obsessively after meeting her once at the bookstore he works at. And this is weirdly related to the 2 books I talked about in part 2 of this wrap-up, along with AJ Thickery and Mr. Penumbra. I think this book totally has an element of book for book lovers in it, because Joe works in a bookstore, and it's where he meets Beck, the center of his obsession, and books and authors are referenced a whole bunch in this. As something for me specifically is that Stephen King and Dr. Sleep are mentioned a bajillion times, and that was just thoroughly entertaining. But anyway, this book just follows Joe as he orchestrates a series of events that he hopes will bring them together. He is absolutely twisted, socially inept, absurdly manipulative, and totally creepy. What makes it worse is that this book is written in second person, as if Joe is speaking directly to you and you are Beck. It's really, really well done. I said in my Goodreads review of this that it's disturbing as all heck, and it really is, and that I'm not sure if I liked it or if it was just so well written that I was tricked into liking it. Basically, what I mean is that it's really hard to rate. I don't know if I liked it. I couldn't stop listening, but it was also kind of sickening, and it made my heart and soul hurt a little bit. Honestly, it could be anywhere from a 1 to 5 stars, depending on how I look at it. It's a crazy ride, I'll say that much. Anyway, that's it for part 3. Part 4, last in this wrap-up, will be posted tomorrow. The last 12 of 48 books that I've read since March. Definitely looking forward to moving on from these last few months and taking on these wrap-ups weekly or monthly from now on. Getting behind this much has been a bit overwhelming when I've sat and thought about how many books I have to talk about in a wrap-up. I'm just very glad that these are finally out there. Anyway, leave me any comments on anything I've talked about or showed you today. Stick around for part 4, and thank you guys so much for watching.